Be'ez Hashem Yisborach, we begin Perek Sheni, the second chapter in the Hilchos Shechitah, in the laws of slaughtering in the Rambam Sefer Kedusha, where the Rambam continues what he opened up in the opening Perek regarding the general halacha categories of what is considered a valid slaughtering. So Rambam begins halacha aleph regarding where do we actually, what's the location of where we slaughter regular chulin types of animals. Says the Rambam, a person allowed to slaughter an animal wherever he wants to. Chutz min hazar, there's one exception from the courtyard of the Beis HaMikdash. Because you're not slaughter in the courtyard. Only those which are sanctified to be sacrificed on the altar. But regarding unconsecrated animals, forbidden to slaughter them in the azar. Whether it's an animal, a wild animal, or a bird. And so too the pasuk tells us regarding what's called desirable meat, which is that which a person wants to eat for his own mundane purposes. It says in Devarim, if the place that Hashem chose for you is going to be very far away, so you're not going to be able to go ahead and bring your animals as karbanos, so then you'll slaughter from your cattle, from your flock, etc. And you'll eat it in your gates. Halmatas comes to teach you that we don't slaughter person's own what's called chulin, desirable meat, except if it's beyond the place which Hashem chose for you. Meaning, if you're nearby, you're going to bring it as a carbon. If you're far, you bring it as basar taiva. Meaning to say, basar taiva could only be far, meaning not in the makam of the azar itself. Now, as the Rambam explains halacha beis, now, this animal that's slaughtered out of the makam of the azara, this is what is permitted to eat in all a person's gates, meaning whatever city, wherever he is. In contrast, if someone does slaughter an unconsecrated animal in the azara, so although that meat is tahar, meaning it's purified from the halacha of nevela, because it was actually properly slaughtered, but it's still forbidden to have even benefit from it, like a mixture of meat and milk and things like that, because this is a prohibited entity of where it was slaughtered in the azar. And you have to bury it, and the efra, if let's say it was burned, the ashes are also forbidden to have benefit, like all those things which have to be buried. And even if the slaughtering wasn't for eating purposes, let's say someone slaughtered for medicinal purposes, or for a Gentile to eat it, or to feed the dogs, doesn't make a difference. There was a shechitah done in the azar, which is forbidden, thus making this like a piece of basar b'challah. Now, in contrast, someone just chops off the head of the animal in the courtyard, which, because the Torah only made it forbidden to slaughter chul nazar, similar to v'zavachta, and these are all not shechitah. So to v'ma'akav, let's say he just rips out the pipes of the windpipe and the food pipe, or v'goysha shachar over Gentile slaughters, or v'asheicha b'nim tzatreif, or if he slaughters a regular slaughtering, but he finds out that it had a moral defect, which like Reb Shimon, the Rambam rules that a shechita she'eina rulish mashchita, if it's not something that's a permitting, which is the whole purpose and utility of shechita, because it's a treifa, so it's also not qualified as a shechita. Or v'asheicha behema chayav oif hatamim bazar. Let's say someone slaughters non-kosher species of behemoths, chayes, and oifs in the azar. All these things are going to be permitted to have benefit. Obviously, you cannot eat these things because they didn't have a shechita, but they won't have the isra b'nav having been slaughtered in azar because they weren't considered quote slaughtered. Now, halacha gimel, now, not only animals and wild animals, which that's what we learned from the pasuk of zavachto, that they have a prohibition to be slaughtered in azara. All mundane, unconsecrated items are forbidden to bring into the courtyard. Even a slaughtered piece of meat, or perits or pasta, or produce, or bread. Now, but if one violet did bring them in, they're permitted as they were to be eaten. But and all these things are words of tradition of halacha Moshe Messina. Now, and whoever, it's divrei kabbalah, meaning that the words of the Torah Shabbat from the oral law. Now, and whoever slaughters chulin in the azara, or he eats an olive-sized piece of meat of chulin that was slaughtered in the azara, so we give him the rabbinic lashes, and the reason that is because this whole prohibition, although it's biblical, is derived from the positive commandment of zavachta, where you should slaughter it, and not in the azar. And that's what we call lavabo machlal asay. If a negative prohibition, which is derived from a positive commandment, has the thrust of a positive commandment, which does not have the biblical halacha of lashes, but one has rabbinic law. Halacha daled. Let's say someone says, behemoth shlamim. This animal, I want it to be a shlam, a carbon. But the embryo, the fetus inside, I want it to be chulin. If the animal was slaughtered in the azara, the child is permitted to be eaten. Which the chiddush is that even though it's chulin, and it's being slaughtered according to azara, because the mother's slaughtering is what permits the fetus that's inside to be eaten, the reason why it's permitted is because you can't slaughter the baby at a far distance. Because the mother is kosher. You now slaughter the mother outside, because the pasuk says, only when it's kiyechak b'mcha makom v'zavachta. Meaning, when you could slaughter b'richim machim, then you're not allowed to slaughter it in the azar. But you couldn't, because the mother, so then it's not going to be forbidden, even for the child. Now, continuing on different halachas related to the appropriateness of the placement of shechitah. And halacha hey, the Rambam says, "Ein shechitin l'tuch yam and haris." We don't slaughter it not into the seas or into rivers. Because maybe people are going to say, this person is worshipping the water. It looks like that he's sacrificing to the water. And neither should he slaughter into a vessel filled with water, because people might say, he's slaughtering to the image that he's reflecting of his own self in the water. That's what he's slaughtering to. And neither should he slaughter in general to vessels, but not into a pit, because that's the norm of those who worship by desire. But if he did slaughter Shechitah, it's going to be valid. Again, he's not doing Favay Dazar. It's only because of Marasai and things like that. So therefore, after the fact, it will be valid. Halacha Vav. Sheichtin l'kli mayim machur, but you could slaughter into a vessel that's filled with murky water, she'ena turiners bem, because you can't even see the image clearly anyway, so you don't have that problem as if he's slaughtering to his own image. Also, and these are all exceptions to the rules of the previous halacha, you could also slaughter outside of the pit, and the blood could flow and go into the pit. Again, we said you can't do into the pit itself, but it could flow in there. Now, but in the street you shouldn't do like this. Because it might go ahead and encourage and imitate the heretics, which again they do it straight into the pit because it's like avodah zarah. And actually, and if he slaughters into the pit in the street, you're not eat from his slaughtering until you check after him, because maybe he actually is a heretic. Now, you're also allowed to slaughter on the wall of the boat, and the blood could flow on the wall and go into the water, although you can't do it straight into the river, but you can do it on the wall, which then it goes by itself into the river. And although we say you can't do it into vessels, but you can slaughter on top of vessels as long as it's not going into the vessel. Now, Allah Chazayin Ram continues regarding the format of the slaughtering. How does one slaughter? So, you stretch out the neck, and you move the knife forward and backwards until it gets slaughtered. And this is bein shehisa behema revut. So this is whether the animal was laying down and he has the knife on top of the animal. Bein shehisa medes v'achas b'urba, whether the animal's standing and he's holding on to the neck. V'saken b'yodil milmata, and the knife is in his hand beneath the neck. V'shachan, and he slaughters arizik shera. Either way, that's going to be valid. Now, halacha ches says, let's say no, it's esasakim b'kais. Let's say he sticks the knife into the wall, so the knife is stationary in the wall. The heverat savra le'ajanishchan is moving the animal's neck back and forth until it gets slaughtered. So shechitah, there's also valid shechitah. But v'hu, this is as long as she had savra habehema lamata b'sakel lamala, as long as the knife is on the top and the animal's neck is on the bottom. She'ema yitzava behema lamala m'nasakin, because if the knife is stationary and the animal's neck is on top of the knife, maybe the animal, which is a creature, will weigh down because of the weight of its body, and it's actually going to cut the animal without moving forward and backwards. Now that is, as we'll learn in the next parak, is what's called drasa, which is pressing, which is puzzle that actually makes the animal into a treifa. Now, in contrast, if let's say someone holding the knife in his hand, as we said in the previous halacha, even if the animal is heavy, then actually the knife would fall down, it wouldn't slaughter. So therefore, even if the neck is on top, it's going to be kosher. But in this case, where the knife is stationary, then the problem will be, again, they might weigh down on the knife, and that won't be qualified as shechita, like we explain in the next parak in halacha yud aleph. Lafikach, therefore, but that's regarding an animal. But if it was foul, which is very light, then then whether the neck is above the knife that's stuck into the wall or beneath it, either way, shechitah is going to be valid because we don't have the problem about weighing down, that it's going to do drasa instead of the shechitah. Halacha test. Let's say someone slaughtered by moving the knife forward on the animal's neck without bringing it back. Or he brought it back over the animal's neck and without bringing it forward, and that slaughtered the animal. That's okay. You don't have to go front and back. You could do either one. Now let's say Heilich Behevi. Let's say when front and back at Shechitah Chareish V'Tiza until it chopped off the head, it cut the head and it chopped it off. Shechitah Share again. That's gonna be kosher. But let's say Heilich V'Lehevi. Let's say went forward without bringing it back. Or he brought it back without bringing it forward. The Hittis is a reish by Locha Bavad, and the head got chopped off with just going forward, or with just bringing it back. So here it depends. If in the length of the knife you have the amount of 2 necks worth of the neck of the animal that's being slaughtered, then then the slaughter is going to be valid because you have enough to slaughter and to chop off the head with just going and without coming back, or coming back without moving forward, that even if you don't press down, it's going to be slaughtered. But if it's not double the length of the width of the neck of the animal, the animal is going to be it's going to be invalid slaughtering. The reason for that is because the only way you must have gotten the head off is with pressing down a little bit, what's called drasa, because it's not possible with just the exact length of the knife of the animal to have chopped it off. If it's so long, you can move ahead and get it, but if it's not double, then it's going to be possible. Now, but let's say shachat shnei roshim ke'echad. Let's say someone cuts off, he does shechitah on 2 heads at the same time. Then even if the length of the knife is not doubled those of the 2 necks, shechitah kasherim, it's going to be valid shechitah. Halach yid says the Rambam shnayim she'ochsu b'sakin. We have 2 people holding onto a knife. Let's say someone's holding the knife on one side, the other one's holding the knife on the other side. It's going to be valid shechitah. And so too shnayim she'ochsu shnei sakinen. Let's say 2 people holding 2 knives. I mean, one's holding one and one holding another one. And they're slaughtering at the same time in 2 different places in the neck. It's going to be valid shechitah. And even if one is slaughtering only the veshet, the food pipe, or the majority, which we said you only have to have the majority. And the other one's slaughtering the windpipe, or at least the majority, somewhere else. It's going to be valid shechitah, which, again, because you got the majority of these 2 pipes, even though the slaughtering is not in one place. And so too, if the slaughtering is done like a quill, which he starts by the kana on the top, and he starts cutting on the incline, going downwards, and wherever he finishes by the kana, that's where he starts by the veshet, again on a diagonal, or ushchita sui kemasik, or if the slaughtering is made like a comb, up and down like that of a comb, it's going to be valid because ultimately he did a shechitah. Now, Allah Rav continues regarding the intent that a person has during the shechitah. Says the Rambam, "Ein shechitah zachul tzricha kavan." Unlike that of kachim, when one slaughters a unconsecrated animal, it does not have to have any specific intent. It doesn't have to have any intent at all. Even if he just slaughters like just being distracted, or like for a joke, because he's throwing a knife to throw it into the wall, and the slaughters an animal as it's going along. However, since it was an appropriate slaughtering in its place and in its measurement, it's going to be valid. Now, so halachid base says Ram Lafikach. Therefore, a deaf mute, or mentally deranged, or a minor, or intoxicated person who his mind is mixed up, murky. Or someone that evil spirit took possession of him. If they slaughter and others see at least that it was halachically a valid and appropriate slaughtering, it's going to be kosher, even though these individuals don't have das, because you don't need kavanah. Now, but if the knife fell and slaughtered, although it slaughtered appropriately, it fell off the shelf because someone banged the door and it fell out, it's going to be invalid. That you should slaughter, it has to be that the person is slaughtering. Although he's not having intent, but it has to be a person. And therefore, and all those people will be valid, but if it just fell by itself, then it won't be valid. Now, relative to this discussion, in Halachiyat Gimel says the Rambam, let's say Galgush 11, let's say that there's a wheel of stone or shalates of wood, that the knife was attached to the wheel. Now the person's turning the wheel. Now he puts the neck of the bird or the animal in its path. That it gets slaughtered by the turning of the wheel because the knife is cutting it. That's going to be valid because it's the person that's making it move. Now, but if it's water that's making the wheel turn, and he puts the neck opposite in the path of the knife, when it's turning and it gets slaughtered, it's going to be invalid because it's the water that's making it move. Now, but if the person released the water to come out, and that caused the water to come rushing and to turn the wheel and then slaughter as the wheel was turning, that's going to be valid. Because again, the water which caused the wheel to turn was coming from the movement of the person. Now, the movement, we say this, but the first time it turns around. Because that's from the force of the person which opened up the path, which had the water go out. But from the second round around, moving forward, then it's not anymore from the force of the person. Rather, it's from the force of the water in its path, and therefore it would be invalid because it would be considered the water making the slaughtering and not the person. Now, Rambam continues regarding slaughtering. Although we don't need kavana, but an anti-kavana like Avodah Zarah would be a problem. As Rambam says, "Hashech l'shem harim." If someone slaughters the animal for the name of the mountains, l'shem gavois, or for the sake of the hills, l'shem yamim for the seas, l'shem naras for the rivers, l'shem midbaros for the deserts. Now, although he's not doing it with the intent of serving them, which would be a problem of Avodah Zarah, el refuah, he's doing it for the name of the mountains, some type of medicinal purposes, or kiyotzibor, or things like that, medivri havai, shamagam, like these foolish things that the Gentiles say. So his slaughtering is going to be invalid, meaning one cannot eat it because it looks like Avodah Zarah. It's permitted to have benefit from it because he's not intending to really do Avodah Zarah, and it's not the norm for Gentiles to worship the mountains and the hills, but it's forbidden to eat. Now, but if he's slaughtering for the mazel, that divine flow of from the seas, or mazel or the mazel of the mountains, or or for the stars and for the different constellations and things like that. Well, that's classic. We call that avodas kachavim, the worship of the stars. That's a benefit like all sacrifices of idolatry. Halachah tezvav, says the Rambam. Let's say Shechitah is a behema. Let's say he slaughters the animal for no Avodah Zarah, but lizruk damal Avodah Zarah, and his intention is that when I'm going to take the blood, I'm going to spray it for idolatry. I'm going to sacrifice the fats for Avodah Zarah. And then so that's going to make the animal forbidden. Why? The Shechitah didn't have any appropriate thoughts. Because we learn out the thought process out of the base of Mikdash regarding unconsecrated animals. From the thoughts that a person has regarding a kachim from the Mizbeach in the Azar. Because such a thought, if someone's shechting kachim for its appropriate namesake, but almanas with the intention of spraying the blood or sacrificing the fat shaloi l'shma, that invalidates, Hilchos I'm going to explain in the laws of what invalidates karbanos in Pektes Vav Halacha Yud, and therefore that has the same halacha here regarding Avodah Zarah. Halacha design, Shechitah, let's say he slaughtered it. And only afterwards, not during the Shechitah. Afterwards he thought, you know what, let me spray the blood for Avodah Zarah, or to sacrifice the fat for Avodah Zarah. So Hariza Asum is suffix, so that's forbidden out of doubt. Shema Sefer maybe, it's not clear, maybe the end proves the beginning of Machshava Kazu Shachad, and really he had that intention when he slaughtered, which was Avodah Zarah, which would invalidate it, and therefore out of doubt it's forbidden. Halachah Zan Rambam continues regarding slaughtering not for Avodah Zarah, but for kachim, which could also be a problem. Hashek l'shem kadashim. So it depends. If someone slaughters for the purposes of certain kachim, shemisnadvim v'nidarim k'maisim, that one is allowed to donate or make a neder to bring those types of kachim, then here also his slaughtering is going to be invalid. It's like slaughtering kachim out of the azar, which is forbidden, because it looks like that. Now, it's not literally kachim b'chutz, because he didn't sanctify it before he slaughtered, but it looks like when he's saying, I'm slaughtering it for this to be whatever, as the Rambam is going to explain, which carbon that you could make in the Dama. So it looks like kachim b'chutz, which is forbidden, therefore the shechitah is possible. But let's say shachal shem kachim she'ein b'hem b'ned nedava. Let's say slaughtering for certain karbanas that you can't even donate or make a nedava. Then shechitah seksheh. Then the slaughtering is going to be valid. As Rambam explains, halach yitches ketzer. How so? Hashech l'shem oilav. So let's someone slaughters. I want this animal. It goes to the farm. And he says, I want to buy a cow, and he slaughters. He wants it to be as an oil, a totally burnt sacrifice. Or l'shem shlamim for a shlam sacrifice. L'shem taida for a Thanksgiving sacrifice. L'shem pesach to become pesach. Shechitah subsula, it's going to be invalid shechitah. Now, all the other ones we understand, oil shlam taida, they could be in the nedavas. What's with that of pesach? That's a chayva. So Rambam says, no, chayva pesach ma'avashayz since the carbon pesach, a person can separate all year round, whenever he wants to, and he could even sacrifice it. Not and besides erev pesach, it actually has the halachic status like a shlamim. So it's also something that's similar to something that can be donated and can be vowed, and therefore again those are things that looks like kachim b'chutz. But let's say sorting this, there should be a guilt offering, a sin offering. Or for a definite guilt offering. Totally for that of a suspended guilt offering, and he doesn't know if he did an aver. It should be the firstborn animal, which is a carbon l'shem ma'isa, but the ma'isa behem, the 10th animal, which is also a carbon l'shem tamur, to be in exchange for a carbon, which is also not needed medidab. In all these cases, it's a valid shechitah because you can't just make this carbon. You can't just make it a ned and a dava, and therefore, it's obviously you're not doing anything wrong, and it's going to be a valid shechitah. Now, Allah your test, but let's say this person did a sin which requires him to bring a carbon chatas. He says, "Lechatos should be for my chatas." Oh, okay, that looks like kosher mechutz. That's shechitah. That's invalidates the shechitah. So to let's say how you like carbon protected base. Let's say he had a carbon in his house. V'shachad, he slaughters an animal. He says, "L'shem tamur zivchi." This should be as in exchange for my carbon. Okay, shechitah b'sula. So shechitah can be invalid. Because he's obviously swapping it, and it is a legitimate tamur. It's not just something that he could just. He's not just making up something. He actually has legitimate carbon in his house, and there's going to be the tamur. Halacha chaf. Let's say a woman slaughters a carbon to be the oilas sacrifice that's brought for when a woman gives birth. V'amar, she says, this should be for my oila. It's going to be a valid shechit. It's not a problem. Why not? Shein oilas yiledis boban and dava. Here also, this is one of those categories. An oila of yiledis, a woman give birth. You can't just donate or vow to bring one. She didn't give birth to obligate herself and bring an oila. And moreover, we're not concerned that maybe she had a miscarriage, and maybe she, which is after 40 days, then you actually are obligated, and who knows, maybe she, although we didn't see her give birth to a baby, maybe she is obligated, maybe it should be considered shechitah b'sula, because it is like kosher mechutz. No, we're not concerned with that. Shekol ha'mapel kol yeshla, because anyone who miscarries, word gets out, people find out this woman had a miscarriage, and therefore, since we didn't hear it, we don't have to be concerned with that. Now, but let's say someone slaughters that there should be an oila for naziris, although we don't know him to be a nazir, the shechitah is going to be invalid. She'ikah naziris nedem and adam, because the primary element of naziris is a vow from the category of vows, and maybe he made a vow discreetly, and you could make a neder and then nazir and then dava, and there's part of nadiris nadarim, so therefore it's going to be considered shechitah b'sula. Halacha of Chavav, the Ram continues regarding what's halacha with a shechitah as it relates to partners, and regarding this halacha of having machshava b'sula, and also as relates to that of a Gentile slaughtering. So Ram says, halacha Chavav, shnaim oichsim b'sakin b'shechitah. Let's say there's two people holding onto the knife and the slaughtering, which we said is valid. But here we're talking about regarding the halachas of kavana. One is having in mind for something that if you slaughter for that intent, it makes it forbidden. The other person who's slaughtering has no intent at all. And even if he's having in mind for something that's permitted to have intent for that, it's going to be invalid because half of the thought, which is one of the people, is for something invalid. So too, even if they slaughter consecutively, one after the other, and one of them is having in mind for something that was invalidated, so the was invalidated because part of the shechitah was done with machshava b'sula. Now, but when do we say this? Office when that the other one who's having machshava b'sula has a partnership in this animal. But if he doesn't have a partnership, in Asudan it's not going to be forbidden. Because a Jewish person does not make something that's not his forbidden. His intent is just to pain the owner of the animal. Because generally a Jewish person, we presume that he's not going to do something just to harm his friend. And even so, but if he is a partner, it would be forbidden because he obviously would not want to cause a loss for himself just to pain his friend. And it must have been that he really had in mind for Avodah Zarah, and therefore again, if he's a partner, it's going to make it awesome. But if he's not, then that obviously that was not his intent, and he's just trying to pain him, and therefore it's not going to be forbidden. Halacha based around Yisrael sheshach l'gai. Let's say a Jew slaughters for a Gentile who wants him to slaughter his animal. So although the Gentile he's having in mind for whatever he wants to, it's going to be valid shechita. The concern of whose thoughts are problematic is only the one who's slaughtering. Not for the thoughts of the owner of the animal, and since the one who's slaughtering is a Jew, it's a valid shechita. Now the figure, therefore, the opposite is also true. If a Gentile is slaughtering for a Jew, I feel like you're cutting, even if the Gentile was a minor who generally does not have machshavas for the zara, shchitas in nevela, the slaughtering is going to be a nevela, not a valid shchita. Like we can explain later on Perek Dal Loch Yud Aleph, because of the pasuk B'kara l'cha v'chalta mizivcha, which in the next halacha the Rambam says over there that they made a great gather that even a Gentile who's not a Avodah Zarah worshipper, that the Shechitah is going to be nevela. So there again, it all depends on who's actually doing the Shechitah.